Hello, my name's John Challis. I'm the CEO here at Concept Searching Limited, and today I'm going to be talking about automatic metadata generation across the full range of SharePoint environments. Concept Searching is one of the leaders in metadata generation solutions for SharePoint as well as other platforms. We've been doing that for a bit over 10 years now. And we've won numerous awards, including, for example, 100 Companies That Matter in Knowledge Management, which we've been awarded every year since 2009. But today, I'm not going to be talking primarily about concept searching or its products. Instead, what I'm going to be doing is reviewing some applications of metadata, and also the sort of infrastructure that Microsoft is giving us out of the box with the various SharePoint platforms. And then we'll look at the type of classifiers that are available to automatically produce metadata across these environments. And we'll compare and contrast various techniques offered by different vendors. And then we'll draw some conclusions from that. But to begin with, let's look at metadata usage. And a lot of people think that metadata is primarily to improve search or findability. And of course that is a very important application of metadata generation. But there are many other applications for metadata, and as we'll see, some of those can have significant return on investment, which I will go through as we look at each of these options. Starting with findability, there's no doubt that we have a major challenge in a lot of major organizations. IDC, for example, estimate that 85% of relevant documents are never returned in search. So enterprise search is a very different challenge from web search, and one of the major difficulties is that the kind of metadata infrastructure that exists on the web and that people like Google and Bing use to such advantage, those things are really just not available inside the enterprise, with the majority of unstructured information really having no metadata associated with it at all. And so we're relying on entering keywords into the text box and matching that to text content within the documents. And no matter which search engine you choose, that's always going to lead to a lot of problems and difficulty in finding the most relevant documents. I really like the quotation from Tom Eade, VP at Gartner, and he says, "The real value of search and information access technologies is in the ongoing efforts needed to establish effective taxonomies to index and classify content of all kinds in order to provide meaningful results." I think what Tom is getting on going on about here, is the fact that it isn't a case of choosing one search engine over another, but really augmenting search with quality metadata so that we can quickly refine search results and home in on the documents we're really after. But such infrastructure comes at a cost, because you don't develop meaningful corporate taxonomies and auto-classification rules without significant investment. But if we want to improve enterprise search, then that kind of investment is what can transform the quality of our search environment from one level to the next. But as I mentioned, there are many other applications of metadata, including data privacy, or the lockdown of sensitive information within an organization. Sensitive information can mean different things to different organizations, but generically we can talk about things like documents that contain home addresses, or bank details, or healthcare results. And when records like that are exposed, the cost ranges, Poneman estimate that the cost of that ranges from $80 to $355 per record. But because records, an individual document can contain multiple records, Poneman estimate that based upon an analysis of 383 organizations this year, the average cost ranged from $2.1 million to $6.7 million documents per incident. So the cost of data breaches and locking down sensitive information can be not only a major embarrassment for large organizations, but also a significant cost. And the return on investment on a technology that can help to identify sensitive material and then automate the protection of that material can have a real payback. Here are some quotes from WebSense looking into the problem, and what we can see is that the risks really are rather widespread, and any search on the public literature will bring up numerous examples of major organizations that have run foul of data breaches, despite the fact that a lot of data breaches never make it into, or never reported into the public domain. But the scale of the problem is significant, and we find that a lot of organizations are looking at metadata generation solutions to help protect themselves from this type of difficult challenge. Document migration is another major use of metadata potentially. There are a number of challenges associated with migration, and of course organizations are often repeating migration operations as they move from one version of SharePoint to another, or if they're moving from some kind of legacy environment into SharePoint or into SharePoint Online. And of course there are a range of third-party products to assist us with that kind of migration. But the majority of mainstream migration tools focus on the kind of forklift approach, where you want to take an entire folder or site collection and move it to a designated location within SharePoint. But often organizations want to restructure their content during the migration process. They want to find all of the documents about a particular topic, regardless of where they reside or what folder they might be in, and move them to a designated location in SharePoint. Using auto-classification, we can identify all of the documents about a range of different migration topics. And then we can, having tagged those documents with metadata, we can utilize that to automate the migration process from a variety of sources into any of the versions of SharePoint we might be working with. And this is ideal for the sort of cherry-picking type migration, where you don't want to take all of the documents, but you just simply want to choose the relevant ones based upon some kind of classification criteria. And once we've put such a system in place, it really doesn't matter if we're dealing with tens of thousands of documents or tens of millions of documents, because once we've automated the procedure, we can just let the software crank through and do the migration for us. Compliance is another major area where we can utilize metadata. A lot of organizations are running in a highly regulated environment, and it's really important that sensitive information is shared only with appropriate people within the organization, and a lot of information must be protected from exposure outside of the organization. Again, we can use metadata generation techniques to tag our documents, find out what sort of documents they are, and then put an automated system in place to protect the movement of those documents. Hoover's estimate that the average cost of manually tagging one item runs from $4 to $7, and that doesn't factor in the fact that humans are notoriously inaccurate when manually tagging documents. And if we have millions of documents, clearly the cost of manual tagging is going to be prohibitively expensive. So again, by looking at an automated solution, we can put a system in place that will tag our documents with metadata, regardless of whether we're dealing with tens of thousands or tens of millions of documents. Gartner predicts that 20% of CIOs in regulated industries will lose their jobs for failing to implement the discipline of information governance successfully. I don't know if that's an overestimate, but one thing's for sure, a lot of C-level executives are very focused on protecting the information within their regulated industry, because the costs and penalties associated with breaches are so severe. And finally, let's look at records management. A lot of organizations have invested heavily in records management software because they need to control things like retention schedules and disposition of documents. But how are you going to do that when you don't know which of your documents are records And if you know it is a record, how do you know what type of record it is? Because that's going to determine how long you need to keep that document and what types of user are allowed to access that document. And again, we can use auto classification to identify our records, and then having tagged them with metadata, we can then feed that into our records management software that we've purchased, enabling the effective use of that technology. Now we've been able to identify our records. But as Forrester says, it's simply not realistic to expect employees to navigate extensive structures in order to identify what type of record we're dealing with. And if we look at this screenshot, we see an example of a records management solution, and you can see on the left hand side a small extract from a large records management structure, and in the main form we can see the sort of evidence that allows our automated solution to determine when a document matches a particular record criteria. But imagine an end user trying to navigate such a structure with pages and pages of codes and attempting to reliably tag each document to identify its record type. It's just not going to happen, and without that we're never going to be able to make use of our records management software. So having looked at the uses of metadata, let's take a look and see what Microsoft is giving us out of the box to support this type of application in a SharePoint environment. And it means what we're looking at is things like the Term Store, manage metadata properties, and some other issues that we'll review as we go through. In SharePoint 2010, Microsoft introduced the Term Store and the manage metadata property type. And this is ideal for creating taxonomies of hierarchical metadata models, and then tagging documents with terms from those models, which are visible in document libraries and lists. And because Microsoft Search picks up this kind of metadata, we can add those fields into the refinement panel, allowing users to quickly filter and refine their search results. So a lot of infrastructure has appeared in SharePoint in 2010 and is found in all versions subsequently. But crucially, SharePoint has no auto-classification capability, so we're definitely looking at third-party solutions if we want to do metadata generation in any of the SharePoint environments. And just to complicate things, Microsoft has decided to use GUIDs, or globally unique identifiers, to track term usage across the farm. And this introduces a number of complexities. Initially it seems like there's no problem, but then when you update your taxonomies, maybe on a test server, and then you decide that you want to migrate those updated taxonomies into the production environment, you realize that you can't simply delete the existing term sets and replace them with the new ones, because that would generate a whole new set of term GUIDs, and all of the metadata in managed metadata properties would become invalid across the farm. And also, we might want to synchronize term stores between farms on premises, or even between our on-premises server and our Office 365 environment. But Microsoft doesn't provide any facilities to do this kind of GUID management. What you'll find is that most of the vendors of auto-classification solutions have recognized this limitation in SharePoint and offer a variety of solutions. And concept searching is no exception. We have comprehensive solutions for this type of GUID management problem. And we even sell a standalone term store manager for those customers who don't wish to purchase our auto classification software, but would nevertheless like to move term sets around and do so on an incremental basis, preserving term GUIDs as the data is moved between farms. Microsoft Search has certainly had a checkered history since SharePoint was launched in 2001. The early versions of Microsoft Search really didn't handle metadata properly. They were completely non-scalable, with search results typically analyzing just the top 200 or 300 documents for metadata, regardless of the size of the full result set. And that didn't really change until SharePoint 2010, when FAST became an option. And whilst FAST can certainly handle the metadata and provide a much more sophisticated search environment than the older Microsoft search technology, it wasn't easy to implement in SharePoint 2010, and of course was generally only available to enterprise customers. However, from SharePoint 2013 onwards, Microsoft has incorporated a lot of the lessons that they learned from the FAST acquisition. And what we find is that since SharePoint 2013, Microsoft Search really does fit the bill now, and it's the obvious choice going forward. And I think the market for third-party search products to fill the gaps around Microsoft limitations really went away when SharePoint 2013 became available. But Microsoft Search is not just for SharePoint content. Of course, we can index file shares and websites and other document management systems like Hummingbird or Documentum. And really, ideally, we want the metadata model to be available for those content sources too. And then when we filter the results through the refinement panel, that should work with documents from all sources, not just from SharePoint sources. But in order to do that, we're going to need to push the metadata that we've generated into the Microsoft Search index. And if we're going to get a comprehensive solution in a SharePoint environment, it's important to choose products that can work in both ways, both with managed metadata properties for SharePoint content and directly with Microsoft Search for other types of content. Of course, there are a number of SharePoint environments still available to us, 2007, 2010, and so on, through to Office 365. And a lot of organizations are still using multiple versions of SharePoint. And so it's going to be important to make sure that the auto-classification solution you select is available on all of the platforms you need. In the case of SharePoint content, we need to populate managed metadata properties. In the case of Microsoft Search, we can use the Content Enrichment Web Service or QS technology in order to push metadata directly into the Microsoft Search index. And for customers using Microsoft Online Search in a hybrid environment, they may well be indexing not only online content, but maybe file shares and SharePoint on-premises servers as well. And Microsoft, I think, has done a really great job on providing a unified search capability for hybrid customers in that situation. But there we need to be able to classify the on-premises content and push the resulting metadata into Microsoft Online Search. And so we're going to need some different techniques for that configuration. So having established that we're going to need third-party products to flesh out our SharePoint environments if we're going to do automated document classification, let's now take a look at the type of classifiers available from a number of different vendors. And what I'm going to do is try and compare and contrast the different types of technology available, and then we'll draw some conclusions from that. But basically there are two main types of classifier. There's those that are based on training sets and those that are based on rules. And then we can break down the rules type products a little bit more, and we'll talk about each of those in a moment. To begin with, the idea behind training sets is that you find some documents that are all about the term that you're working on, and then you use those elite documents to train the classifier. You say, here are some documents about topic A, here are some documents about topic B. Analyze the documents, and then you should be able to recognize more documents about A and B if we give you an unclassified corpus. And this type of technique is used, for example, by MarkLogic and Content Analyst. It used to be used by Autonomy's early products, although they tended to move away from that nowadays. But the problem with this type of approach is that it can be very difficult to find an elite set of documents for every term that we want to work with. And even if we can find an elite set of documents, what we tend to find is that customers hate this approach because when the classification doesn't work, the only route to improving the accuracy is to find some more training documents. And if we're still getting mistakes after that, there's really nowhere to go, because the classifier in this case is a kind of black box whose actions even the vendor can't fully explain. And so there's really nowhere to go if the initial classification accuracy is insufficient. And strangely, we see MarkLogic and content analysts continuing with the kind of training set approach as their primary route to auto classification. Although, as I mentioned, autonomy have shifted away from this more recently. The majority of vendors today are offering rules-based classifiers, where there are explicit rules that the administrator can set up and monitor to see why documents are being classified. And then when mistakes are made, they can go in and adjust the rules based upon their tacit knowledge of the subject matter. There are a couple of different types of rules-based classifiers. We have the exact match technology, which uses keywords or phrases and Boolean expressions. And if we find any of these things in a document, then we can tag them as being about a particular term on the taxonomy. And then there are other classifiers that take a more fuzzy approach and attempt to accumulate evidence that a document is about a particular term. So let's look at the exact matching technology first. The problem with exact matching is that it delivers a binary result. The document is either relevant to a term or it isn't. There's no score. There's no aboutness calculation that says how much the document is about the term. And no matter how sophisticated the exact matching, we're never going to get accurate classification results across a broad range of terms. Because there's no way that we can prioritize one document over another in terms of how much it's about a particular term. Examples of product that work in an exact match way include Microsoft's Content Organizer and also their file classification infrastructure products. Layers 2's Auto Tagger and BA Insights Classifier. These are all low-cost or no-cost products. And they don't employ any significant statistical or linguistic technology. They're kind of cheap and cheerful classifiers that you might look to get started. But if you're interested in accuracy, then I think you're going to have to look at one of the products that employs more sophisticated fuzzy matching type technology. So as I said, there are a couple of different kinds of those. We have the linguistic products that perform their analysis by looking at sentence structure and attempt to identify things like noun phrases and verb phrases in order to home in on the major topics within an unstructured document. And sometimes this type of technology can work very well, but the problem is that one language is very different from another. German is very different from French, and of course Chinese, something quite different again. And with there being so many different languages, it's a major challenge for the linguistic vendors to come up with technology across all the languages that might be needed. But that isn't the whole problem, because once we enter different vertical sectors, we find that the vocabulary and usage within, say, a pharmaceutical company is very different from what we might find in a law firm or a government department. And so linguistic vendors will often produce cartridges of vocabulary specifically targeting legal or pharmaceutical or finance or whatever. And of course that has to be done in every language. But even then, linguistic solutions can be thrown by grammatical style, because, for example, something like a legal contract or a patent application will have a very different grammatical style compared to, say, a news article or a website. Developing linguistic classifiers is a bit like trying to boil the ocean. No one has the resources to develop different technology for every vertical sector in every language and that can cater for all possible semantic styles. Convera provides us with a stunning example of one company that wasted over $1 billion of shareholder money trying to do this. And vendors who persist with this approach include SmartLogic, Expert Systems, and Pool Party, for example. The real alternative is statistical processing. And the advantage of statistical processing is that it avoids most of the problems inherent in linguistic processing. By tokenizing the text, we can use mathematical modeling to extract the meaning from documents, and most of the differences between languages can be eliminated. And, equally importantly, unique vocabulary found in different vertical sectors can be dealt with automatically, because the technology is adaptive and can automatically process even vocabulary that it's never seen before. And it tends to be much more resilient to differences in grammatical style. And as a result, statistical techniques tend to behave much more consistently, and they adapt automatically to different customer environments. Vendors who offer statistical classifiers include concept searching, and also Autonomy's latest range of classification products. So let's have a look at some conclusions here. Automated meta generation has a variety of applications, and it can eliminate manual tagging, which is highly expensive and highly error-prone. With an automated approach, we can have a truly comprehensive solution that processes all of our content, not just SharePoint content, but also the other stuff out on file shares or legacy document management systems. It can be completely consistent with the same results every time, and it's highly accurate, should be far more accurate than any human classification approach. And there are lots of third-party studies to back up these conclusions about the typical accuracy you can expect if you involve humans in this process. But because Microsoft isn't offering any auto-classification solutions for any version of SharePoint, we are looking at third-party products. And those third-party products can tackle issues like improved taxonomy management, of course, auto-classification, and the metadata generation that will push the metadata into the appropriate place, whether that's manage metadata properties in the SharePoint farm, or directly into Microsoft Search, whether that's on premises or online. And you need to make sure that the solution you go for provides all of the GUID management you're going to need as you live with taxonomies and update them over time and move them from one farm to another. SharePoint today is largely deployed on premises, but of course there's a huge push towards online, and many organizations are looking at embracing online either now or in the future. But because of the transition will take some time, and because in some cases some content will have to be kept on premises or in specific geographic locations, I think hybrid is the new norm in the SharePoint environment, with many customers continuing to have some on-premises farms together with increasing usage of Office 365 and a search environment that is going to span all of those environments. And so we're going to need products that integrate with the Term Store directly and manage metadata properties for SharePoint content, and integrate with all of the flavors of Microsoft Search for non-SharePoint content. Here's just a couple of resources for you if you would like further information. Concept Searching recently conducted its 4th annual SharePoint metadata survey, and you can get access to the full report online using this URL. And also here's a white paper that introduces Concept Searching's unique compound term processing, which is the technology that underpins our statistical classifier. So there's a lot more resources available there and generally on the Concept Searching website. My name is John Challis. I'm the CEO at Concept Searching here. If you do have any questions or feedback from me based on this or anything else to do with metadata generation in a SharePoint environment, please contact me using the email address shown on the screen now. Thank you and goodbye.